Hey there, I'm Terry from Tree Marie Soapworks, and today I'm going to show you how I made this batch. It's an ultra thin line swirl, and it's the technique we learned for the September of 2020 soap challenge. The soap challenge is hosted by Amy Warden, and this time we had a guest teacher named Tatiana Serko, and I've given information in the description below for Amy and Tatiana. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that I have tips throughout this whole video and all my videos, and I usually do a section at the end of my videos of what I learned and kind of troubleshoot and find out what I would have done differently or what I will do differently for my next batch. So it's notes to myself, but notes to you also. You can learn through me and my experiences, so just hang in there for the end of the video. Okay, let's get started. First, I use about 1/3 to 1/2 of my water weight in distilled water ice cubes, and then I top off the remaining water weight with distilled water. For the next step, we'll be measuring the lye, and that's a step that you must be geared up for safety. Before you make any kind of soap using lye, you need to make sure you understand the proper safety procedures. I've linked a video about lye safety in the description below. Next, I add the sodium hydroxide to the water and I stir that until it's dissolved. Make sure, especially when you're using ice cubes, that you get it all dissolved and don't let any settle on the bottom. If that happens, it's really hard to break up, so just make sure it's all dissolved in the beginning. Next, I measure the sodium lactate. Sodium lactate is a totally optional ingredient. It's a natural ingredient and it helps your soap to release from the mold much easier and cleaner, and it also helps the soap to last longer. Next, I set these ingredients aside in a place that's well ventilated and safe for many kids or pets. My next ingredient is sustainable palm kernel flakes, and palm kernel oil is very similar in makeup to coconut oil, but the difference is it has a lot more stearic acid. When you use palm kernel flakes and coconut oil, you usually use it for the hardness and for the lather, and it can be a bit drying. Well, palm kernel oil would add a little more moisture than you would get from your coconut oil because of the extra stearic acid. Next, I measure the coconut oil and the lard. This ingredient is kind of shied away from, and I understand if you're a vegan or you're staying away from lard for religious reasons, but if you're not and you're looking for an ingredient that makes your bar hard and also slows down your batter, lard is a great ingredient for that. It has a lot of stearic and palmitic acid, but not a lot of the lauric and myristic acid, so it's not drying and it's making your bar hard. And it's also a substitute for palm oil if you're trying to get away from palm oil. Okay, next I measure my liquid ingredients, and for this one all I have is the castor oil and the olive oil. Now that I've melted those 3 hard oils, I go ahead and add the cocoa butter, and I just stir it till it's melted, and if it needs microwaved, I just microwave it until it's just barely melted. Next, I measure the fragrance oil, and today I'm using Black Tie fragrance from Wholesale Supplies Plus. It's a very slow moving fragrance and it actually decelerates your batter, so this is a very good fragrance to use for this technique because we need our batter to stay fluid while we work. Next, I measure kaolin clay into my fragrance oils, and I'm using a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Since kaolin clay is so absorbent, it sometimes causes acceleration, but since it's really diluted with this fragrance oil, I never notice any acceleration because of it. Next, I'm going to prepare the colorants, and I'm starting with titanium dioxide. I've already pre-dispersed this in olive oil. I used a rate of 1 part titanium dioxide to 3 parts of olive oil, and I'm using this for my base color. And to figure out how much I need, I go to Elements Bath & Body's colorant calculator, and I'm using a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. I put the information in that it asks for, and it gives me the results of how much dry colorant I need, and also if I'm pre-dispersing it, it gives me the information of that amount pre-dispersed in teaspoons and also in tablespoons. My next ingredient is smooth coconut carbon, and I'm using it at a rate of 1.5 teaspoons per pound of soap. And all of these colorants come from Elements Bath & Body. All of the rest of these colorants I'm using at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. And next one we have black onyx mica. I'm using 2 ounces of batter for each of these, so when I go to the colorant calculator, I look under per pound of oils, and I look under when you're using a specific amount of batter, and I just fill in the information and I get out the amount that I need. That was smoky black mica. It makes a really pretty gray color. And then next we have Faded Blue Jeans Mica, which is also a gorgeous color. You see these little color samples that I made. I used the rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils to test these colorants, and they kind of came out a little differently when I made this batch because some of these color samples didn't go through gel. So the Celestial Blue color ended up coming out darker when I actually made it into soap, which is more what you would expect by looking at the color of the mica. I know you're used to me using my palette knife and my plexiglass to mix my colorants, but really for this one, the only one that's difficult to mix is the titanium dioxide, and I did that ahead of time. So the smooth coconut carbon is very powdery, and that's easy to mix, and then all of the micas are easy. The palette knife and the plexiglass are really helpful for when you're using pigment colors like your oxides and your ultramarines and neons. That's when I like to use them because they tend to clump a lot more, and then you'll have them in your final batter and there'll be specks and streaks when you cut them, and it's just really annoying. So that's why you need to get your colors pre-diluted and dispersed before you mix them into your batter. Next, I add the liquid oils to the melted hard oils, and you notice they look a little shimmery in there, and that's because olive oil contains some palmitic acid and a little bit of stearic acid, and both of those are saturated fats. So when you stir them a little bit, that causes them to melt because of the warmth of the other oils, and you always want your oils to be clear. If they are starting to cloud up and get solid, you know that you need to microwave them again. I don't worry so much about temperature. I worry more about having all of my saturated fats melted and completely clear, otherwise you can get stearic spots in your final batch. After that, I strained my lye solution into my melted oils, and then I realized that I forgot to add my sodium lactate to my lye solution, and so I just added that too. It's not a big deal, but I usually do add it to my lye solution first. For reference here, I'm showing you the temperatures, but again, for me, it's more important that my oils are completely melted. Usually my temperatures end up falling between 85 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's between 26 and 35 degrees Celsius. Next, I stick blend until an emulsion is reached, and you can kind of look at the edge all the way around the bowl and you can see that there's a slick of oil, and that's what needs to be mixed in. And when you find that all of that is mixed, that's when your mixture has reached an emulsion. You can see that when I stop and then when I start again, you can see those slicks of oil kind of get swirled into the center, and that's not quite mixed yet. So you just pay attention to that. You can pull your stick blender out and look at the stainless steel, and you can see whether it's starting to break apart or get kind of wavy, or if it looks really thin and even film on there. If it's even film, that means that it's emulsified. Next, I'm pouring off 2 ounces of batter, or 56 grams, and I'm just figuring out the first one, and then I'm just going to eyeball the rest of them to get it about the same height in the container. Once I have these all measured, I use my stir stick and stir them by hand until I get them all dispersed evenly. And I do that before I add the fragrance, because after adding the fragrance, you don't want to be stirring too much to get your colorant dispersed, because once you add the fragrance, usually your batter will move along a little more quickly. And for this recipe, we need it to stay fluid just as long as possible so we can get our designing in. I gave my fragrance and my kaolin clay a little blend, and then I scooped out 7 milliliters, which happens to be a half a tablespoon, into each one of these little 2-ounce containers. Once I get the fragrance and clay in there, I just make sure it's dispersed evenly. After everything's dispersed, I go ahead and get my mold ready. Today, I'm using a 9-bar slab mold. Next, I'm just pouring stripes of color, and I'm trying to get them to break through to the bottom of the other batter, because that way we'll have color all the way through the batter. To get the color to go to the bottom, you just drop it from a little higher, and that helps it break through. For this technique, we had to achieve really thin lines, and to do that, we had to swirl the lines really close together. So for this one, I used a popsicle stick and I used a straight edge to help me, which I really recommend. But one thing I would do differently right here, I would have pulled the skewer out at the end and reinserted it, because you notice at the blue part especially that I drag it to the end and then I drag it back and it pulls it back, and the line doesn't go all the way to the edge. So that kind of messes up the design on those bars that are on the very edge. Also, I really liked the straight edge and the popsicle stick, and possibly I would even consider using a tongue depressor to do the swirling. The popsicle stick really helped as opposed to when I just used a round glass stirring rod. I usually like those for swirling because they really glide on the bottom, but I think the flat skewer pulled a lot more soap. For this soap challenge, the rules were that for the advanced category, you have to design each individual bar and you have to use the same design. So first I'm sectioning off the bars and making the vertical lines to delineate each one of the bars. And if you would swirl the other way, it wouldn't make a swirl, so I can't delineate the bars in the other direction. This part is the part that made the difference between the regular category and the advanced category. We had to do a little design and make it consistent throughout each bar. Once I was finished with this, I just covered it and I forced gel like I normally do in the oven by turning the oven on to 170 and just for a few seconds just to get it warm, and then I just turn it off, put my soap in, turn the oven light on and leave it on until I go to bed, and I turn the light off, let it come to room temperature naturally, and then I leave it covered for a few days, and then I cut my soap. First, I have to divide these bars by 3, and in order to do that, I use the trick of slanting my ruler. I have an architect scale, and I pick a number that's divisible by 3 that's a little bit bigger than the width of my slab. In this case, it was 30, so I divided 30 by 3, and then I marked on every 10, and I joined those lines together, and that's how I equally divided this slab by 3. If you're interested, I made a video on why I slant my ruler, and it explains that in a little more detail. Okay, I'm just using this jig that my husband made to cut these lines vertically with my wire cutter. Next, I just use my planer and get that top layer off so it's a smooth bar. This is totally optional, but it often enhances the design a little bit. After this, I just divided each of these 3 pieces into 3, and I got my 9 bars. Okay, now I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that I would like to remember for next time and that worked, and some of the things that didn't work. It's very important to use a slow moving fragrance and even a decelerating fragrance, and this black tie fragrance from Wholesale Supplies Plus is definitely a decelerating fragrance. And there's energy from Brambleberry, and I also use pink grapefruit from Wholesale Supplies Plus. Those are all good ones. Yuzu is another one from Elements Bath & Body. Sometimes fruity ones have that citrus in them, which is a degreaser, and that slows down fragrances. Also, after you get your soap to an emulsion, don't use your stick blender after that. Just wait on your batter and stir it by hand. That will really help it not to accelerate, and don't get in a rush. If you get in a rush and decide to stick blend it, a lot of times you get it too far and you can't go back. My next tip is when you're swirling, move your swirl tool slowly. I know in my video it looks like I move it fast because I speed it up, but I think you get a better swirl if you move it slowly. Another thing to remember with your swirl tool is that wherever you pull it out, it's going to leave a little pool. So when I designed these individual bars, every spot that I pulled it out kind of has a little muddled spot. And if I was doing this again, not for a challenge, I wouldn't individually design each bar. I would pull through, and that way there wouldn't be so many spots that are pooled. As I mentioned earlier, when you're using your swirl tool to drag your soap in one direction and then you change and go in the opposite direction, it kind of drags your swirl back, so your swirl won't go to the edge. So if you want your swirl to go all the way to the edge, just pull it out and reinsert it. I think I need to remember that a lot for my designs when I'm doing this kind of soap making. Another tip that I have for doing this design, when you're pouring your color on the top, you really need a pour spout. I tried it with a paper cup and it just ran all over the place and my lines were terrible. So if you have a pour spout, that helps a lot. I just got these beakers on Amazon and they have any size you could want. Do you ever find that when you're doing designs for these kind of soap challenges that you wouldn't have done otherwise, that you kind of get some ideas for some new ways to do things, new ideas for designs? And I have gotten a few and it's gotten me off on this tangent, and I can't wait to share some of these ideas with you. So stay tuned. I really appreciate you watching today, and if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell if you want to be notified next time I release a video. I read all your comments and I appreciate your feedback and all of your suggestions and ideas, and keep them coming. I do hope to up my video production rate, but for now just stay tuned and make sure you have your bell hit for notifications. And if you're interested, I have a Facebook group that is for learning and for troubleshooting and asking questions and sharing what you make. If you join, you have to join under your personal Facebook account and not your business. And also please answer the 3 questions that it asks in order to join. If you haven't been accepted into the group, it's probably because you didn't answer those questions. Also, I have soaps and recipes available at my website, and if you're interested, take a look at that. And I know I need to post some more of my recipes. I have some that I just love and I want to get out to you. Also, many have been asking for the palm-free recipes, palm-free vegan recipes, and I need to get those finished. I just keep getting pulled away to other projects. So please hang in there and keep checking back. I'll also let you know in the Facebook group when I get new recipes up on the website. Thank you so much for joining me in my soap making journey. I hope you're learning lots and have a great day.